I exposed my wife's secret affair with my friend by printing every hidden message they sent each other. It all began in what seemed like an ordinary moment. But in hindsight, it was anything but ordinary. The story I am about to tell you isn't just about betrayal, it's about self-discovery, resilience, and the unexpected ways in which life can both tear us apart and stitch us back together again. It's a story of heartbreak, but also of profound growth, a journey I never saw coming. 5 years ago, I was at a friend's wedding, minding my own business and enjoying the buzz of the celebration. When I met Mia, the connection was instant, almost cinematic. We shared a table thanks to some playful matchmaking by the bride and groom. And the chemistry was palpable from the moment she smiled. As the night went on, we danced, laughed, and even stole a few kisses under the twinkling lights. It felt like the kind of romance you only see in the movies. Little did I know that the way we met, full of charm and fairy tale serendipity, would contrast so sharply with how we would end. Mia and I hit it off. And before long, we were inseparable. We dated for 2 years. And everything felt perfect. It wasn't just love, it was comfort, companionship, and a sense of belonging. We decided to get married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by family and friends. For a while, it truly seemed like the universe had aligned to bring us together. We had our ups and downs, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary, just the typical bumps in the road that come with merging two lives. But then, things began to change. At first, it was subtle. Mia seemed more guarded with her phone, turning away when I was around or leaving it face down on the table. Girls' nights became more frequent, and the intimacy we had once enjoyed seemed to dry up. Our conversations, which used to be full of laughter and warmth, turned increasingly short and businesslike. Something felt off, like a cold wind that had settled between us, chilling what was once a warm and comforting home. I remember trying to dismiss my fears, telling myself that it was just stress. A rough patch, something we'd get through. After all, every couple has moments like that, right? One night, my instincts got the better of me. Mia was asleep, and I found myself staring at her phone on the nightstand. Part of me knew that crossing that line would mean something irreversible, that it would change the way I saw her forever. But my suspicions wouldn't let me rest. I picked up her phone, but it was locked, guarded more securely than usual. I moved on to her laptop, checking messages and emails, but found nothing out of the ordinary. It was almost enough to convince me I was just being paranoid. But something deep inside wouldn't let go. The breakthrough came when I decided to search her car. I found a second phone hidden in the glove compartment. A secret phone. My heart sank, and I knew, before I even unlocked it, that whatever I was about to find would change everything. When I finally managed to access the messages, it was like a punch to the gut. There were texts and photos exchanged with Jack, a friend of mine. Jack, who was supposed to be someone I could trust. Seeing their messages was like watching my world crumble. I could feel the anger, disbelief, and heartbreak swirl into a cocktail of emotions that left me breathless. I took screenshots of everything, printed out every message, every picture. I needed proof, not just for the divorce I knew was coming, but for myself. I needed to see it all in black and white, to know I wasn't imagining things. I felt a strange sense of calm as I read through their conversations. It wasn't even the betrayal itself that hurt the most, it was the ease with which they did it. The casual tone of their messages. It made me realize just how far Mia had drifted from the woman I thought I knew. I knew I needed to confront her, but I also knew that doing so without a plan would only end in chaos. I reached out to Ted, the groom from the wedding where I had first met Mia. He was one of my closest friends, and when I told him what had happened, he was just as shocked as I was. Ted and I went out for drinks, and I poured my heart out. It was the first time I'd said the words out loud. Mia is cheating on me. With Jack, Ted looked like he'd been punched. Too, he knew Jack well. They'd been friends longer than I had. It felt surreal, like we were living in some kind of twisted soap opera. The next day, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. I walked in, laid out all the evidence, and simply said, "I want out." The attorney nodded, looking through the documents. He was sympathetic, but also practical. He explained the legal process, what I could expect, and assured me that I was in a strong position given the evidence I had. It was the first time in weeks that I felt like I had any control over my life. That evening, I went home to face Mia. She was sitting on the couch, looking at her phone, and she barely looked up when I walked in. I asked her to come sit with me. She seemed annoyed, as if I was interrupting her evening. I told her I knew about Jack. I laid the printouts in front of her, watching her eyes widen as she scanned the pages. Her face went pale, and she started to stammer, trying to deny it, trying to spin some kind of excuse. I held up a hand to stop her. I don't want your explanations, I said. I want you to pack your things and leave. She cried. She begged. She promised that it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. She even suggested we could go to the bedroom, as if that could somehow make everything right. But I was done. I looked her in the eyes and said, Mia, I will never touch you again. Pack your things and leave my house. The calmness in my voice surprised even me. I think she realized, in that moment, that there was no coming back from this. She packed a bag, and I watched her walk out the door, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The days that followed were a blur. I contacted Mia's parents, letting them know what had happened. They were shocked, of course, and tried to reach out to her, but I didn't hear much from them after that. I also reached out to Jack's fiancée. She deserved to know. She was devastated, just as I had been, but she thanked me for telling her. She said she'd suspected something was wrong, but never imagined it was this. We met for coffee a few times, just to talk. It helped, having someone who understood exactly what I was going through. We shared our anger, our heartbreak, and eventually, our plans to move on. One of the most surprising aspects of this whole ordeal was the support I found in unexpected places. Mia's sister, Emma, reached out to me. She told me she was furious with Mia, but that she wanted to be there for me as a friend. I was hesitant at first. After all, she was Mia's family, but Emma was genuine. She told me she couldn't condone what her sister had done and that she wanted to help me through it. Over time, we became close, not romantically, but as friends who had both been hurt by someone they trusted. I won't lie and say that it was easy. There were days when I felt like I couldn't get out of bed, when the weight of the betrayal felt too heavy to bear. But there were also moments of clarity. Moments when I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the end of a chapter. I started going to therapy, something I'd never considered before. It helped me unpack not just the betrayal, but also the parts of myself that I'd lost in the relationship. I realized that I'd spent so much time trying to make Mia happy that I'd forgotten about my own happiness. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, took up hobbies I'd abandoned, and even went on a few dates. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but it felt good to put myself out there again, to remember what it felt like to be wanted and appreciated. I also reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with during my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that I had a support system that cared about me. The most important lesson I learned through all of this was that betrayal doesn't define you. It hurts, it leaves scars, but it doesn't have to be the end. I realized that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for, that I could face the worst and come out the other side. I also learned the value of trusting my instincts. The signs were there, and I ignored them for too long, hoping things would get better. But ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away, it only makes it grow. One day, about a year after everything had happened, I found myself sitting on my porch, looking out at the sunset. It was a peaceful evening, the kind of moment that made you feel grateful just to be alive. I realized then that I was happy, truly happy, not because of someone else, not because of a relationship, but because I'd found myself again. I'd taken the pain, the heartbreak, and turned it into something beautiful, a new beginning. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: you're stronger than you think. Life will throw curveballs at you. People will hurt you, and sometimes it will feel like the world is ending. But it's not, it's just changing, and change can be good. Embrace the pain, learn from it, and use it to grow. Don't let betrayal make you bitter, let it make you better. To anyone out there going through something similar, know that you are not alone. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you can't see it right now, keep moving forward, one step at a time. And eventually, you'll find yourself in a place of peace and happiness. And when you do, you'll realize that the journey, as painful as it was worth it. Because it led you to yourself. I Ada for refusing to raise my husband's children from his affair now that he and the woman he cheated with have passed away. The air was heavy, as though it carried the weight of too many secrets. The sky outside was gray. The kind of weather that makes people feel as if the universe itself is uncertain about what comes next. It was on such a day that Alice received the news that would change her life forever. Her phone had rung, breaking the stillness of her empty living room. She looked down to see the name she least expected. It was her husband's aunt. And she had news that shattered whatever semblance of normalcy had been left after the past 2 years of heartbreak and betrayal. Alice, there's been an accident. Jack and the woman, they've both passed. The twins survived, but they're orphans now. The words hung in the air, suspended between disbelief and sorrow. Jack, her husband of 23 years, and his mistress, the young woman with whom he'd betrayed her, were gone. Alice put down the phone. She wasn't sure what to feel. A combination of relief, sadness, and uncertainty swirled through her. The weight of betrayal that had been sitting on her chest for months seemed momentarily lifted. Yet, there was a heaviness that replaced it almost instantly. The boys, Jack's children, born from the affair, were alive, and now completely alone. A knot formed in her stomach as she thought of them. Innocent souls tangled in the web of mistakes woven by their parents. The affair had started back in 2020, during a time when Alice had thought their marriage was solid. Jack was a man of almost 50, steady, dependable, or so she had believed. But then the affair had begun, and the reality of Jack's secret life had unraveled with every lie exposed. He had been seeing a 20-year-old, and they had twin boys together in March. Alice had been furious, crushed, and ultimately resigned to end things. The divorce had been a long and grueling process, slowed down by shared properties and accounts. Jack had taken money from their shared account to support his mistress, and Alice had been forced to bring in an accountant to help untangle their financial lives. After his death, though, Jack's estate was to go to Alice and their 2 daughters. As Jack hadn't updated his will, his parents, elderly and in assisted living, couldn't take the twins. The mistress's parents were also unable to help. Alice was left facing pressure from Jack's in-laws, who begged her to take the children in. They pleaded, insisting that they were family, that it was the right thing to do. The twins, after all, had no one else. But Alice didn't feel that way. She was exhausted. She had spent the last few months barely holding herself and her 2 teenage daughters together. The betrayal had left wounds that were far from healed, and she wasn't sure she could ever love those children. She didn't want to be the evil stepmother, the kind of person who resented 2 innocent boys for something they had no control over. But deep down, she feared that's exactly what she would become if she took them in. Her daughters, Emily and Sarah, were 14 and 16, teenagers already navigating their own emotional turmoil. They hated the twins, or perhaps it was the idea of the twins, a living, breathing reminder of their father's betrayal. Jack had not just cheated on Alice, he had broken the bond with his daughters. And his actions had tainted their perception of him forever. The pain was raw, and Alice knew that bringing the boys into their home would only add to the tension. Alice sat down with her daughters to discuss what had happened. She wanted to be honest with them, to give them a voice in what would come next. Emily was the first to speak, her voice trembling as she said, "Mom, you can't bring them here. I know they're just babies, but every time I see them, I'll remember what Dad did." Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes filled with tears. "We're just starting to get used to things again. Mom, we need you, and I don't think you can do this for them and still be here for us." Alice knew they were right. She wanted to help the twins, but she also needed to protect her daughters. She was already stretched thin, emotionally, mentally, financially. Raising babies, especially in such circumstances, would require a level of strength and patience she simply didn't have anymore. But she also wasn't heartless. She couldn't ignore the fact that the boys were innocent. They had lost their mother and father, and Alice wanted to make sure they were cared for. She spoke to her lawyer, arranging for a portion of the savings, $25, to go to whoever would become the boys' legal guardian. It wasn't much, but it was something, and it was all she could do. Days turned into weeks, and still, no one came forward to take the twins. The legal system moved slowly, and the boys were temporarily placed with their maternal grandparents. Jack's parents, who were too frail to care for the twins, continued to pressure Alice, calling her selfish for refusing to take in their grandchildren. They called her cold, heartless, accusing her of abandoning family in their hour of need. Alice struggled with her decision. She knew what people would say, that she was being cruel, that she was letting her bitterness control her actions. But she also knew herself. She knew that if she took in those boys, it wouldn't be out of love, it would be out of guilt. And that wasn't fair to anyone. Not to the boys, not to her daughters, and not to herself. She remembered her own childhood, growing up in a household where resentment festered just below the surface. Her parents had stayed together, for the kids, and Alice had spent her teenage years wishing they hadn't. She didn't want to recreate that environment, an environment where love was conditional, where children were made to feel like burdens. She wanted her daughters to feel secure, to know that their home was a place where they were loved unconditionally. And she knew that if she brought the twins into her home, she couldn't promise that. The media often glorifies the idea of forgiveness, of self-sacrifice. People love stories where someone does the right thing, even when it costs them. But real life isn't always like that. Real life is messy, and sometimes doing the right thing for yourself means disappointing others. It means saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. It means putting yourself and your children first, even when it makes you look like the villain in someone else's story. Alice knew that she wasn't the only one facing such a decision. She knew that there were others out there, mothers, fathers, people who had been betrayed, people who had been left to pick up the pieces of someone else's mistakes. She wanted them to know that it was okay to say no, that it was okay to protect yourself, even when the world tells you that you should be selfless. Alice's journey wasn't just about the twins or her husband's betrayal. It was about learning to trust herself again. It was about learning to make decisions based on what was best for her and her daughters, not based on what other people thought she should do. It was about letting go of the guilt that had been eating away at her since the affair had come to light. As the days turned into months, Alice began to find a new sense of peace. The calls from Jack's family eventually stopped, and the legal proceedings moved forward. The twins were placed with a loving family, a couple who had been trying to adopt for years and were overjoyed at the opportunity to raise the boys. Alice felt a sense of relief, knowing that they would be cared for by someone who wanted them, who could love them without reservation. She focused on her daughters, on rebuilding their lives together. They started new traditions, movie nights on Fridays, hiking on Sunday mornings. They talked about their feelings, about Jack, about the twins. There were still moments of pain, moments when the loss of the life they thought they had was too much to bear. But there were also moments of joy, moments when Alice looked at her daughters and knew she had made the right choice. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily turned to her mother and said, "Mom, I'm proud of you. I know it wasn't easy, but you did what was right for us." Alice felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had doubted herself so many times, had wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But hearing those words from her daughter made all the pain, all the uncertainty, worth it. Alice knew that life would never be perfect. There would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt. But she also knew that she was strong enough to face them. She had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, and she had come out the other side, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect the people she loved. The story of Alice is not just about betrayal and loss. It is also about the strength it takes to say no, to set boundaries, and to prioritize one's well-being. Life often presents us with situations where the right thing to do is not clear-cut. Society tends to push the narrative of self-sacrifice, of always putting others first. But Alice's story reminds us that sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is to protect ourselves and the people we love, even if it means making decisions that others may not understand or agree with. Throughout her journey, Alice had to confront her own fears and insecurities. She had to navigate the complex emotions of her daughters and find a way to keep her family together after being torn apart by betrayal. She learned that love, real love, is not about sacrificing yourself to meet the expectations of others. It is about being honest, setting boundaries, and making decisions that allow you to be the best version of yourself for the people who truly matter. To anyone facing a similar situation, whether it's dealing with betrayal, navigating a difficult family dynamic, or simply trying to do what is best for yourself, Alice's story is a reminder that it's okay to say no. It's okay to protect your heart, to set boundaries, and to make decisions that prioritize your well-being and the well-being of those you love. You are not obligated to carry the weight of someone else's mistakes. You have the right to choose your own path, to create a life that brings you peace and happiness. Alice's courage to say no, to refuse to raise the children of her husband's affair, was not an act of cruelty, it was an act of self-preservation and love for her daughters. And in the end, it was the right choice for everyone involved. The twins found a home where they were truly wanted. Alice and her daughters began to heal, and a new chapter of their lives began, one defined not by betrayal and loss, but by love, resilience, and hope for the future.